Welcome to the Industry 4.0 Club's Fireside Chat. The club's purpose is to engage the power of a diverse worldwide talent to accelerate the global evolution to Industry 4.0. We accomplish this by hosting and supporting respectful, thoughtful, and interdisciplinary open conversations and creating quality content on wide-ranging Industry 4.0 topics to expand the reach of our community. My name is Mike Ungar, and I am the CEO of the Industry 4.0 Club. I have over 40 years of leadership and experience, with most of that experience in manufacturing at Michelin. Today, we are airing the fifth episode of our series of broadcasts entitled Lean Industry 4.0, Operational Excellence Meets Technology. Hosting this series with me is Tim Stuart. Tim is the president of Visual Decisions. Tim, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
As you said, Tim Stuart from Visual Decisions. I founded the company 22 years ago now to take data from the shop floor and blend that with process improvement, lean practices, and so forth to drive improvements for my customers. So we've gone through a variety of different technologies during those 22 years and have kind of lived through the rise of Industry 4.0 solutions and utilized those in a variety of different settings, primarily discrete manufacturing, but really across anybody that builds stuff. And use that to make performance improvements for our customers. So there you go.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate that. So our broadcast today is entitled Empowering Your Workforce with Technology. Our guest today is Anthony Turgman. Anthony is the CEO of Live Solutions. With inspiration from his sister, his co-founder, Live Solutions helps manufacturing companies bring unique solutions to life. Anthony has over 15 years of experience in the world of consumer packaged goods manufacturing, has assisted in 2 design-build projects, led 3 design-build manufacturing plant developments, relocated 2 plants, 2 operations, if you will, demoed 4 plants, and effectively managed over $350 million in capital budgets, leading over hundreds of hourly employees and inspiring dozens of cross-functional teams across a variety of organizations, ranging from Fortune 500 to small family-run operations. Anthony, that's quite a resume. We're glad that you could join us today.
Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
So just before we get into the topic, I wanted to point out for our folks that are listening on LinkedIn, if you've got a question for us as we talk today, please put it into the comment section and we'll get a chance to get to it hopefully before we finish. So Tim, would you mind starting us off and sharing a little bit of background about the topic we're going to talk about today?
Sure. One of the analogies that I use all the time when talking about implementing Industry 4.0 solutions is, for instance, with the Internet of Things and connecting sensors and everything else. I've been wearing a Fitbit for 11 years now and have definitely not lost any weight during that time. And it's not the Fitbit's fault. It's a great IoT device. It collects information from sensors. It pushes that information to the cloud, uses AI to translate those raw signals into footsteps and heartbeats and sleeping patterns and everything else. And then it presents that information very nicely in graphs and charts and everything else on my watch, on my phone, on my computer. But if I don't change my behaviors, if I don't change the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, I'm not going to lose the weight. And it's the same thing with implementing a lot of these technologies on the shop floor. If you don't change the behaviors of your people, if they don't fundamentally do something differently tomorrow than they do today, then you're not going to get the improvements that you're hoping for. And so as part of these implementations, one of the primary considerations has to be not just the technology, but how are you going to empower your workforce in order to take advantage of those technologies? And then, what are the roadblocks that can get in the way of them making those changes? And one of those concerns that many people have is the fear of being monitored, that big brother feeling. And that's particularly true with certain technologies, such as video analytics and so forth. And so as you're looking at these different implementations, you have to keep those things in mind, both from a positive point of view of how do you make the workforce better? How do you, improve their performance? How do you make life better for them and so forth? And then from a guarding against negative perception, how do you avoid those big brother syndromes and so forth.
Thanks, Tim. I appreciate you getting us started here.
Yep.
So, Anthony, let me throw the first question over to you to talk about it for a second. From your experience, what technologies are most perceived as invasive by employees? And can you provide any examples of how these technologies have been implemented in ways that employees have found them intrusive?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number. I think Tim mentioned a couple, but like moving more toward company-centric, company-focused technologies, I think we have email and file monitoring now more than ever, with Microsoft implementing a more collaborative and centralized Office 365 offering. We have time tracking software. We have this cool new cutting edge augmented reality, artificial intelligence layered surveillance systems in factories that help mitigate safety incidents and promote good behaviors and theoretically correct bad behaviors. This one is actually very interesting to me because it has been proven that employees, while watched, will operate safely, and while not monitored, will operate in their own way. I wouldn't call it necessarily unsafely. And they use practices that may be kind of unconventional or more convenient for them. This surveillance system typically offers insights for companies to understand how their employees work so that they can offer beneficial training, more targeted offerings in their safety meetings and stand down talks, because every company has this kind of culture of safety, but it's really founded more in a reactive nature than more of a proactive nature. So what I like to think about these technologies that offer companies insights is it can go one of two ways. It can either be used by a company as a tool for retribution. I guess that's maybe a very strong word to use, or yes. It can be used for by a company as more of a promotive and proactive tool that helps kind of guide their safety culture or guide their culture in general, and helps embrace employee habits and work to change them and evolve them in many ways.
It seems like with technology too, or some of the we hear about today, that what employees think is influenced so much by social media and the news, as much as it is their own objective views of what it's going to be like. Have you seen the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on the company and the company culture, I think. And it's really how the technology is promoted. I don't know, Tim, in your experience, if you've seen anything of like that's been predominantly detrimental, but I mean, take robotics for an example, right? They could be seen as invasive or intrusive or even substitutive, where employees can see, hey, we're being replaced. It's the beginning of the end. They can feel threatened, develop a sense of defensiveness, where they don't want these kinds of technologies in the workplace. In fact, I remember a facility that I was working with to implement robotic palletizing solutions a few years back, and several employees were very concerned. And all of the questions that I would get were like, why? Why are they doing this? Why are we moving in this direction? And we constantly had to explain the rationale, justifying that we weren't just eliminating headcount. We were doing this to optimize the process and eliminate ergonomic risk. And oftentimes, it's the company's responsibility to communicate these things, and the company often, as I mentioned, doesn't do it the proper way, and it can be seen as really detrimental to the workforce, where in fact there is a benefit.
Right.
In this particular circumstance, we had a cross training between first and third shift, and it turned out that all of the employees decided not to show up to the cross training event, where we had really important information to share, and they were like, no, we're not going to be a part of it because we feel like we're being replaced, we're not being included in the decision making. That was so surreal for me to experience.
Yeah. Tim?
Yeah, there are a lot of different technologies that can be perceived as either invasive or substitutive. Robotics and automation technologies certainly as substitutive, where they're being viewed as something that's taking jobs away, whereas it may just be automating the most difficult parts of the job or the most dangerous parts of the job and so forth. But the invasive side is interesting in that even something as simple as IoT or machine monitoring can be viewed as big brotherish by the employees. We've had implementations where the company wasn't communicating with their workforce effectively, somewhat despite our coaching to do so. And in places that already have a kind of negative relationship between management and labor, particularly in certain kind of combative union environments, that can be kind of an incendiary situation where these technologies are being implemented and the workforce views it as a way to just document either the behaviors or who's not pulling their weight and so forth on the shop floor in order to lead towards getting them out of the company and so forth. And so we've had in those kind of environments companies or employees actually like cut wires and do
sabotage
things to kind of fight against these solutions being put in place.
Yeah, that's wild. I think what I heard both of you talk about, and maybe say it a different way, that if you have a foundation of trust, you're on your way. If you don't have trust, and you're with your, between employees in general and teams, you're gonna, that's harder to bring in this new technology. That's how at least I would summarize it. I've seen teams that trust one another, trust their leadership, and it. They may not fully understand, but they're willing to go down the road. And then others where that trust doesn't exist, and it's a very difficult road to hoe.
Yes. For some of the specific technologies, the one that is kind of most obviously concerning to a lot of people is the video analytics, where you have video being taken of the process, and it's actually looking at the workers themselves and how they're moving within the workstation. And something like that's kind of 24/7 video of the workers themselves doing the manual operations and so forth, that has to be presented to the workers in the right way. Otherwise, it's very easily perceived as being very kind of invasive and very big brotherish.
Yeah, and that's one of the most concerning parts about walking that tightrope as a company, where you want to do the right thing, but you don't know how to effectively manage the change. And that's the disconnect that we've seen a lot in our experience, my personal experience, and as a company. When working in engagements with various clients or working at factories with the hourly employees, there seems to be a huge disconnect as to the nature of why things are being done. Even the companies that think they have their communication or their trust established aren't necessarily being deliberate in the way that they execute these things in communicating or over communicating, presenting these technologies in a way where employees feel comfortable. And that's the biggest part about these implementations, is ensuring that employees feel comfortable when a new technology or something that's foreign to them is introduced, because the last thing you need is an employee or a workforce in general that is working against the change. And whether it's, Tim, you mentioned sabotage. I've seen a number of very creative methods of sabotage in my experience, where you just look at it and you almost have to give the employee kudos, like, well done, you found a way. But those kinds of circumstances should create this sense of awareness within companies to say, hey, are we doing this the right way? Have we taken the right measures and approaches? And the good companies will stratify themselves in this way, where they will form a process and react and form a change that is not only methodical, but intentional and deliberate, and kind of paved in a way where, or presented rather in a way where employees kind of latch onto it. And then you have the companies that continue to make the same mistakes and perpetually just fall into the same traps over and over and over. And, it kind of becomes an unavoidable mistake.
So how would a company, we're talking about making sure that people do the right thing. Can we go another layer down, Anthony, and maybe give some examples of, what are some things that a company should do when bringing new technology and that really, with the idea of empowering the workforce to use it?
Oh, absolutely. I think philosophically, I model my approach after a company I'm sure many people wouldn't necessarily see as a leader in this realm, but in my opinion, they present as a really good tech-forward, employee-centric leader, and that would be GE, General Electric. Surprisingly so. Back in, I can't remember, I think it was the early 2010s, maybe 2009, 2010. I was just coming out of college at this point. I'm dating myself there. But GE, I think, implemented a program that really focused on the kind of the marriage of digital and industrial. And they encourage employees to join the change management process and set the direction the company would then take in the years to come. I think I studied this when I was, doing taking my Lean Six Sigma black belt exam, and I stumbled upon this, and I made this part of my DNA, like my philosophy, because I believed in it so much. I came from a culture that I think this would resonate with many people, in that our voices are just not heard. We're the younger generation moving into an old guard, so to speak, of industrial professionals that really they knew what they were doing. And to see a company like GE think in this mindset, or use this mindset to leverage their employees and engage their employees, it changed my entire perception of what good looked like in industry. And this realization was renewed recently when I had an interaction, actually just a few weeks ago at Automate in Chicago. When I met an individual from GE who's leading their augmented reality program within the aerospace division. It was like a wake-up call, because I've always seen GE as kind of those on-the-fence companies where they kind of want to do tech, kind of don't want to do tech. They haven't made up their mind because they're a legacy company in many cases. And during this discussion, I figured that they were more of like the cutting edge adopters. They were the alphas of tech adopters because they wanted to be tech forward, but they weren't doing it from a using a corporate centric mindset. They were leveraging more of their employee feedback and their employee ideation sessions to leverage what's out there and bring it to task, bring it to GE and say, hey, we're going to try this, see if it works. And if it doesn't work, hey, that's cool. We'll figure out how to retool it or scrap it altogether. And that to me was like, oh, I can't imagine a company like GE being that company, but they're really setting the tone and the standard for many big, legacy companies.
Yeah, good. Tim, have you seen, how about yourself? What have you seen in terms of what Anthony was sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of best practices that are out there. Certainly, everything that you can find in the change management literature, John Cotterod of Harvard is a good example, there of different practices that you should put in place. But first of all, as you're looking at these different solutions and you're even thinking about what the requirements are going to be and so forth, so you're setting that vision up front, involve the people from the shop floor. And I know it's hard to take those people off of the shop floor sometimes, but find a way to get them involved, give them a voice in the process so that they know that their point of view is being recognized. And it's not just, smoothing the way for, these things later. They actually have very relevant insights in most cases. And they actually see how things work. And so if you can involve them, you're probably going to end up with a better solution in the first place. But getting them involved, giving them a voice certainly has that impact up front. Keep them involved throughout the implementation process. And then, as you're looking to utilize the systems downstream, I think I've used this example in a previous session of ours, but I worked with a company that did like TPM Tuesdays, where every Tuesday they would shut the line down for an hour, look at the data that was coming from the system, working with the operator team, working with maintenance team and engineering and everybody else, what were those top 3 issues from the past week?
Right.
What do you think the root causes of those different problems were based on the feedback from everybody? And generate different ideas on how to make things better. And having the workforce involved in that process lets them know that you're not there to monitor them, you're there to make things better. And so keeping them involved, not only upstream with a voice into what you're going to be doing, but actually using the solution downstream is going to help eliminate those different fears.
Yeah, I hear a theme through what you guys are saying, and it's really one of them. It seems to be is that people need to be clear about why you're doing it. In other words, if you understand why, you still may have some suspicions, but at least you have the clarity from the leadership about why this technology, why are the benefits, what are the benefits in doing it, and why now, if you will. So that's really neat. So I guess the other thing I think about with bringing new technology in is kind of goes back to the why, and it's starting with the problem rather than starting with the technology.
Right.
So if there's a clear problem and everybody sees it and understands that we need to solve it and that this is an alternative to solving it, you have that why that's very clear. If, on the other hand, you bring in the technology and it's just because you want to play with it, that why doesn't resonate the same for folks, I don't think. Have you guys seen both of those examples kind of play out in factories?
Yes, absolutely. When in the industry, we use the phrase pilot purgatory probably too often.
I like that.
But you implement technology for technology's sake, it has a tendency to stall out. But when you implement it because you know what it is that you're trying to achieve, now you're not only implementing technology, but because you are thinking broader, you actually think about what are the behavioral impacts, what are the cultural impacts of those things. How do we need to change the process to take advantage of the new capabilities and so forth? And because you're doing all of those things, it's kind of natural that you're going to be involving the different people and do those right things in order to achieve that end goal and the end value, the outcome that you're trying to drive.
Yeah, I've seen it from that same standpoint. I did like that phrase a lot. I'm gonna steal that one from you. But the mindset that companies take into making change is always like tech is going to be a solution. And at Live Solutions, we don't see tech as a solution, which is kind of ironic because we are looking for solutions to help companies advance. And many times a company tries to engage us, they're like, we have an equipment or some kind of software or some kind of tech that we want to implement. We really don't have the resources to do it. They come to us and they're like, hey, can you help us do it? We're like, time out. Let's push pause. Let's talk to the people. Let's understand, to Tim's point, why you guys are wanting to implement this. Let's look at the problem. Let's understand everything, the inputs and the outputs that are created by this problem, right? Good or bad. And let's understand how we can frame technology as not a solution, but a tool to help us get the end result. There's so many other components to that change that need to be managed that companies often overlook, like the employee communication, leveraging the voice of the customer or the employees of the customer, they're the end user. To Tim's point from earlier, they know exactly how that piece of equipment works. So in order to model and replicate the process, we need to listen to them, hear them, and understand what their feedback is, so we can make a change that's, again, not only involving their feedback, but intentional and intentionally designed with the outcomes that we seek. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's first and foremost the most important thing that we need to do is, as a society, yeah, I can pick up my phone here and say, yeah, this is great. It's going to solve all my problems. Tim's point with the Fitbit example earlier, it can help me communicate better. But ultimately, if I don't know how to communicate effectively, this is just a tool. It's a lever to be used in a situation when I know I need to use a lever. But if I don't know how to use that lever, the onus is on me to identify the process, the people, and the structure around that will help me effectively remove that obstacle and get to my desired end result.
Super. One of the things that I've noticed, or one of the things I think is a good practice for larger companies that can afford to do is, even for smaller ones, finding a shared resources is some sort of a lab where people can kind of play with the technology, become comfortable with it. And so if I'm an operator on the shop floor or associate on the shop floor, and I've got an issue, do I have access to the lab to see what might be out there to help me solve my problem? In other words, I've really empowered my workforce. I'm engaging them, the workforce, in the solution. I'm willing to give them the time to work on the problem, to expose themselves to the technology. So I think that really it's one way, at least, that I would think about, that folks could really empower the workforce. What it does require, though, is a very proactive approach, right? So almost to expose folks to the technology before it's needed, not even sure if it's going to be needed for the problem they're going to have. I don't know, you guys seen any labs in your travels that have helped to do that same thing or not?
Yeah, I haven't seen a whole lot of companies implement labs where they're getting the shop floor people involved with the lab environment. Usually, what I've seen from different companies is if they're doing something where they want the people from the shop floor involved, it's more of a pilot or a proof of concept type of thing that they're actually implementing on the shop floor, and then trying to get the operators involved. But I absolutely see your point that, having that laboratory kind of environment and getting those people in there and part of it, and, letting them know by, the fact that you're having them come out of production and spend time with that it is important not only to have them, look at this technology, but their input on it is important as well. And so I can definitely see the benefits.
Yeah, it's kind of a tightrope because companies that do this typically have the resources to invest, and they can afford, based on redundant labor force, and they can afford to take people off the lines and invest the time into it.
Yeah.
But technology is also constantly evolving, so it's kind of tough for companies to stay ahead. But I think, I haven't seen any of these personally, but I think what would work really well is if you structure kind of like, to take Tim's point a little further, not only just a pilot program, but a pilot lab where you take a resource that you have on the floor and kind of miniaturize it, or kind of maybe block it off, take it in chunks and place it into an environment where an employee can work with it in a not high stress environment, where they have the time and the support to mess around, make mistakes, and understand it. And I could see this almost like an evolutionary step for companies trying to upskill their labor force and create kind of succession planning or cross training, or some kind of labor improvement plan, workforce improvement plan, education plan. Because I feel like that's kind of a critical part about why employees come to work nowadays. There are some employees that will come to work for all intents and purposes just to collect the paycheck, right? I've heard this a number of times throughout my career in client engagements. I'm just here for the pay, right? I get it. But now I feel like manufacturing companies, in industry in general, companies are becoming leaders in upskilling their workforce, and ways that they could do it is very much by creating an environment where it's, low barrier to entry. They don't need to have that employee coming in there feeling a little apprehensive, because imagine throwing someone who has no tech background into this lab and they're like, oh,
yes,
it's intimidating, right? I this is not for me. That's the first thing I hear a lot of times too. You don't want to create that. So creating an environment where they're kind of encouraged and hey, go play, make it playful, make it engaging, make it appealing, so that their guard is, lowered and the employee's a little bit more receptive, and you appeal to a broader range of employees and not just those in, a certain age range as well. That's the benefit. But I've honestly never experienced anything like that in my career. So I'm hoping that becomes more prevalent.
And Mike, the other thing I'm thinking about is that type of resource is probably only available to larger companies. If you're a small and mid-sized manufacturer, you probably don't have the resources to create that laboratory type of environment where you're looking at a variety of different technologies and so forth. And in those cases, there are external resources that you can work with.
Exactly.
A lot of the better community colleges around the country have programs where they have those kinds of labs and so forth that you can partner with. There are various industry groups and so forth that are out there. And so, if you're a smaller or mid-sized company and you're looking for that type of a setting, you may need to look externally, but there are definitely resources available.
Yeah, albeit kind of hard to find sometimes, but they are out there.
Yeah.
Well, and that's what we need to.
Very well advertised.
Yeah. I mean, that's where one of the things if I could just share from the club perspective, if someone out there has got a question about, where can I go to learn about this technology? I mean, reach out to the Industry 4.0 Club. We're glad to try to help find and connect you with a resource that would answer your question. We know there are a lot of communities, really robust communities, where the manufacturers have come together. They've all thrown a little bit of money into the pot to create this common lab, so to speak, or support the community college, as you mentioned, Tim, by creating a lab there that's also training their future employees. So there are a lot of good examples, but you may be in a factory that's not close to one, and that's where you might need to reach out for help without question. I want to return to the question about video. And, we talk about video is great, especially when your equipment may be a bit older and difficult to connect to other sensors. Video can be put in really easily and be an asset to you. How do I implement that? That seems to me to be the most significant thing. Like, I don't want a video watching me work, I mean, have you guys seen any good practices around that specifically?
Yeah. So, certainly all the things that we've talked about already, involving the people in the process, having them understand why, having that clear vision of what it is that you're trying to achieve and communicating that vision and so forth. But, there's also a personal appeal. I mean, any worker that's been at a company for a substantial amount of time, if I go to them and ask, how often have you suggested ways to make things better, and how often have you been listened to? Usually the answers are a lot and not very often. And if you go to them and say, hey, if you have this video, you'll be able to say, look, I did it the way that, the standard operating procedure says, and it took, a minute and 45 seconds. When I did it my way, it took 60 seconds. And so we can save time, and it's easier for me to do it that way. And now you have actual evidence of how to make that process better and so forth. And so it can benefit you and actually give you a voice in, having the process, get better because of your input and so forth. And then it's up to the company to actually, listen to that voice that the employees now have. And so it can be approached in a way that makes it good for everybody. But you have to be intentional about it.
Yeah, I mean, I can take a completely different technology and use it as an example, right? Golf trackers, swing trackers, or even for baseball, right?
Yeah.
The number one thing that I got after I had someone track my swing was, oh, I didn't know I did that, right? The biggest unlock between the employees working on the floor and management is that fact that management doesn't necessarily know what's going on. There's a disconnect. So in implementing these technologies, it's important to understand there are going to be people that are naturally defensive to the findings because they may think that things are really going one way, where in fact they're going a completely different way. When I looked at my golf swing, I said, oh my God, it's ugly, it's hideous. Like, I can't believe that my swing is that bad. But over time, I learned to improve it. With hourly employees, going back to a point that we've made earlier, they know what they need to do in order to be resourceful, not only to make the company more money, because I think that's the last thing in their mind, it's to make their jobs easier. And with video technology, I think Tim hit the nail on the head. You are empowering them by providing them with the evidence they need to take to their leadership team and say, hey, this is a reality. Now decide. But you need to frame it in that way. And I feel like if you frame it in that way, you empower the employee, you give the employee the control, not necessarily the control, but the voice that they were lacking because no one was necessarily listening. I feel like that is kind of the common thread in this discussion where in order to empower employees, hey, guess what? You need to listen to them. You need to give them the platform on which to stand to make their concerns heard. But this video technology validates that, right? It gives that leverage. And hey, guess what? OEMs that manufacture the equipment that these employees are going to eventually use are not designed with the employee in mind. They're designed to solve a problem, right? Not for the operator. Believe it or not, most OEMs that I've worked with throughout my career, when given this video evidence, said, oh, I never thought of it that way. I never really looked at it from the perspective of the employee. It's like mind blown. Who do you think is going to operate the equipment? Right? It's, you don't have Android robots.
And one thing that I'll say that probably shouldn't need to be said, but we're talking about actions and behaviors and implementing these different projects and so forth. Advice for how to communicate to employees that they're valued. Underlying all of that is you need to actually value the input from the employees and actually value them, and then behave accordingly. And so, that's fundamental to this whole thing. And it should go without saying, but I felt I needed to say it anyway.
I was trying to pick up through our conversation some of the common culture points that companies ought to have in order to be successful at implementing the technology that, like I said, when you think about what you hear in the news, might even create some suspicion. And I wrote down some of them, and maybe you guys can add here. So we talked about trust earlier. We've talked about being able to listen to what people, listen to feedback and value that input. We talked about involving the workforce in the solution, starting with the problem and then involving them in solving the problem, like I said, and then being clear about why this technology is important, being able to share that why with transparency. Are there other traits that you would share, just that you think about with respect to having a culture where technology can be implemented in a successful manner? Anything you would add, Tim or Anthony?
Sure. Lead by example. So I see a lot of cases where management is telling their people to use data to make decisions, but then they don't look at the reports themselves. And if people see that, then they'll know that you don't really mean it. So if you lead by example, if you utilize those things in your own decision making, and you show that it's important through your actions, that's going to help lead people to utilize those things in their own work and so forth.
Thank you. Or they're given the data and they don't know how to make decisions off the data. That's leadership, but you got the hourly workforce making decisions because they can connect the dots. Some leaders are too afraid to make decisions, in fact, where if you empower the hourly employees to make the decision, you have to be able to not only make the decision yourself as a leader, but back that decision and stand by it if their decision is not in fact correct. Own the mistake, because mistakes happen, right? Failures are probably the most natural part of change management, right? Learning from those failures is really what separates the good leaders from the bad. Being able to move forward and grow versus like reprimand and discipline. But the other thing that I would say is encourage employees to be a part of the strategic vision and the master plan for technology implementation from now to the future, because their voice, again, and this goes back to listening, but it's more, again, strategically aligned with getting a company prepared for takeoff, right? To get So overall, I feel like that's probably one of the more important parts of really creating employee engagement and empowering.
So I heard humility. So I think you mentioned about being humble, about being able to admit when there's a mistake, and then involving them in really the strategic planning of where you're trying to go. So we've been talking together for about 40 minutes, and I guess we're kind of reaching to the end of this broadcast. Final thoughts on this whole topic of the workforce and technology. Tim, you want to start us off?
Sure. So I think that it's important to again value the employees and then behave accordingly. So how are you going to empower them? What are the behavioral changes that you're looking for from the workforce, and why? If you're doing this from a technology point of view, or looking at it from a technology lens, what are the behavioral changes that you're looking for them to be able to take advantage of that technology and utilize that on a daily basis? And why are you looking for those changes? What is the vision that you're trying to achieve? What are the outcomes that you're trying to achieve? And how does all of that tie together? And you need to be intentional from the very beginning of you're looking at this, you're driving the requirements and so forth of what it is that you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it, and what are those different things across people, process, and technology that need to be updated in order to make this a win for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Anthony, final thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I guess the biggest thing that I have to take away from this is, and I think this is philosophically aligned with most companies, but some still don't acknowledge it, that if you are continuing to fail, there is a pattern developing. You got to stop and kind of rewind and look through what's been done and understand, again, what you're trying to design for and work towards from there. A lot of companies feel like if they stop, they lose momentum, they lose buy-in. And then, if they're publicly traded or otherwise, they have investors kind of anxious. They don't want to stop, but they continue to perpetuate the same mistakes. It's okay to stop. It's okay to reflect, and it's okay to change course midstream. The last thing you want to do is continue to impart change and fail at it and not learn from your mistakes. So the biggest thing I would say is take note at where you are as a company and understand where the failures have kind of taken place. And the number one thing that should be done after that is engage the workforce, the broader workforce, all the way from the ground up, and understand where they think you need to be, why we failed to where along the way, and how we can course correct, and really just, again, bring everybody together in one kumbaya moment to understand how to move forward as a company and then execute. The biggest thing, take that plan and execute against it. You got a winning formula after you've done all the aforementioned.
Excellent. Thank you, Anthony. Thanks, Tim. Well, it's been a great conversation these last 45 minutes. I want to thank Tim and Anthony for joining us today. We'll also thank everybody for listening, and hopefully you've taken some important pointers away. We want to invite our listeners to participate in future broadcasts. If you would like to be on one of our Industry 4.0 broadcasts, please, there's a form you can fill out on our website. So please do that. Let us know that, and we'd be glad to get back with you and see if we can find a way to plug you into a future broadcast. The Industry 4.0 Club hosts conversations on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, alternating topics around the themes of women in manufacturing, the future of manufacturing, fireside chats like this one with industry leaders like Anthony and Tim, and then people, process, and culture. So we hope you'll join our LinkedIn page and visit our website at www.industry40club.com. Again, thanks, Anthony. Thanks, Tim, for a really engaging conversation. And I want to wish everybody a great rest of the day and a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.